But there is a narrow road that leads to life, and there few be found on that. And I would ask you this morning, what road are you on? A mediocre faith says, I'm just going to follow the crowd. I'm going to be like everybody else. I'm going to be average. And what's the average Christian do? What's the average Christian look like? I would submit to you, it looks nothing different than the world. The mediocre Christian engages in gossip. We're called not to do that. But is there some in this room likely today that have engaged in gossip this week? I think so. It's mediocre. Are there some in this room that have no time for God except for this hour they've set aside on Sunday morning? I would probably say yes in a room this size. That's mediocre. Are there some who pursue their will for their life and forsake that which God has called them to? I would say, yeah, that's mediocre. That's exactly what the Israelites did, and that's exactly what angered Nehemiah. And that's exactly what angers our God. And I think of Romans chapter 12, verse 2, where Paul says, be not conformed to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. It's not okay to be mediocre. If your view of Christianity is showing up on Sunday morning and filling up a pew, I'm just going to say it. You're not a good Christian. You're not a biblical Christian. Christianity is a pursuit of Jesus Christ. Are you pursuing him? And if you want to pursue him, if you want to overcome this mediocrity, because it's acceptable in our culture, it's acceptable in our churches, but if you really do want to overcome it, let me give you two tools that you can overcome it with. Number one is mercy. Look at verse 14 through 16. Nehemiah says, when I was appointed to be the governor in the land of Judea for 12 years, neither I nor my brothers ate the food allotted for the governor. But the earlier governors, those preceding me, placed a very heavy burden on the people and took 40 shekels of silver from them in addition to food and wine. Their assistants also lorded over the people. But out of reverence for God, I did not act like this. Instead, I devoted myself to the work on this wall. All of my men were assembled there for work, and we did not acquire land. Moved by the plight of his people, Nehemiah chose not to govern by might, but to govern through mercy. Okay? We find ourselves in different times during our lives in positions of authority, in positions of power, and we have the choice whether we're going to exercise our might or we're going to show the mercy of God. And Nehemiah was in that situation. And I would submit to you this morning, in Powers Lake, North Dakota, we are in that situation today. And why did Nehemiah choose mercy over might? Because he knew what God expected of him. He knew Micah chapter 6, verse 8, when he says, the Lord expects this of you, that you act justly, that you love mercy, and that you walk humbly before your God. Now let me ask you this morning, do you act justly? Do you treat others as you would want them to treat you? Or do you engage in exacting usury? Do you use your power or the position that you find yourself in to gain an advantage, to take advantage of people? Or do you act justly? Do you love mercy? And let me explain to you what mercy is. Mercy is the compassion that God gives us to look out for the needs of people who are hurting, who are broken, who are poor. Mercy is not giving people what they deserve, okay? But showing them grace. Do you love mercy? Are you a merciful person? I think of when I was in college. I am not musically inclined in any way. And I was going to school to be a teacher, and one of the classes was a music class, and it was just this bare bones minimum music. And I had to learn piano scales. I can't even clap on beat. So learning piano scales was hard. And our test, we had to sit at a piano and play the scales. Okay, I barely know them, but the test was supposed to operate in this way. You sit down, you play the scales without mistake, and you pass. If you have a mistake, you fail, and you have to take it again. Okay? This piano teacher showed me mercy, because as soon as I started, I messed up. And I looked at her and I said, "Could I have another chance?" And she said, "Yes." She didn't give anybody else in the class another chance. But she showed me mercy. And I wonder, do we do that for other people? Do we give other people the benefit of the doubt? Or do we assume that they're here to take advantage of us? Do we assume that they're a threat to our existence? Do we assume the worst about people? Do we engage in mediocre Christianity? Do we, when we hear other people gossiping about somebody else, do we join the conversation? When we hear about somebody charging crazy rent for some place that's unfit for anybody, do we say, "Well, that's okay, it's just, that's a good thing, he's using his assets to his ability"? Or do we look on people with mercy? Do we look to give them a hand up instead of shoving them down? And it was out of Nehemiah's love for God that he rejected the selfish patterns of his culture and instead lived a life that was surrendered to God. I think of Luke chapter 6, verse 36, where God says, "Be merciful as I am merciful." I don't see where we can hedge our bets there. He's commanding us to be merciful as he was merciful. So how was he merciful to you? He did not give you what you deserved, which is hell. Instead, he gave you a place in glory if you put your faith and trust in him. And if I'm to be merciful as he is merciful, that's exactly how I got to treat other people. Let me put it this way. Maybe we ought to treat people as if we were treating them as they're Jesus himself. Right? If we were to treat people as if they were Jesus, man, we wouldn't gossip. We wouldn't slander them. We wouldn't take advantage of them. We wouldn't do all kinds of things that we do. We wouldn't make preconceived judgments about their character. If you want to overcome mediocre Christianity, mercy has to be part of your life. And I will ask you this morning, does mercy mark your life? When people see you, do they know you as a merciful person? But more than that, more than mercy, God calls us to martyrdom. Look at verse 17 through 19. Furthermore, 150 Jews and officials ate at my table, as well as those who came to us from the surrounding nations. Each day, 1 ox, 6 choice sheep, some poultry were prepared for me, and every 10 days an abundant supply of wine. In spite of all of this, I never demanded the food allotted to the governor, because the demands were heavy on this people. Remember me with favor, my God, for all that I have done for these people. More than living a surrendered life, a life denoted by mercy, Nehemiah chose to love sacrificially. Nehemiah had every right to take the money that was coming to him. There was fees that he got paid to be governor. And part of the fees were financial, and the other part of the fees were sheep and goats and bulls that would come in his direction. And that was part of his compensation. He was right to take them, but because he saw people who were in need, because he saw people who were hurting, he knew he had to do something. And what he decided to do was not take the pay, but to give out of his own. You see this ox that was given, these sheep that were given, this poultry that was given, that came from him. That came from him. Those were his resources because he saw the issue and he knew he couldn't ignore it. He saw his brothers being sold into slavery. He saw them starving in the streets and he said, I have to do something. So he decided to act by sacrificing what was rightly his so that others might live. And isn't that exactly what Jesus did for us? Though we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. I think of 1 John chapter 3, verse 16. Everybody knows John 3:16. But what about 1 John 3:16? It says this. This is how we know love. That Christ died for us. And since he died for us, he gave his life for us, we ought to give our lives for our brothers and sisters. That's what Nehemiah did. What we see here is a picture of grace. While mercy is not receiving what you do deserve, grace is receiving that which you don't deserve. And don't get me wrong, there are people in your life who deserve nothing. But the same is true of you, spiritually. You deserve nothing. And God acted on your behalf anyway. So the question is, will you follow his example? Will you not only be an image of mercy to your community, an image of mercy to your family, but will you show them grace? Will you see a need and act? Because I believe that's what God has called us to do. And by doing so, Nehemiah became a martyr. Now, we don't read about Nehemiah dying, because I know when you hear that word, martyr, you think death. But that's not what that word means. It carries that connotation. But the word martyr means a witness. Nehemiah was so committed to the cause of God that he was a witness for God in the place where he lived. God is calling us to be martyrs, to be witnesses, to be those who are committed enough to his cause that we act in our community. That we see a need, we meet a need because he met ours. He met our deepest need, the salvation of our soul. I'll close with this. As I said, I wasn't a good student. I was in college. I had very good GPA in college. But in high school, I just didn't try. And as I went into college, I learned how to study and I became successful because I applied myself to the work that was in front of me. Well, I was in college for a year. Another class at my high school graduated, and then a girl from my high school comes to my college and she takes a class with me. And it was a human biology class. It was a pretty difficult class. But at that point, I had learned how to study, and I was doing very well. She was one who was just brilliant in high school, but was still learning how to study. She was having a hard time. So she goes back to our high school and talks to our guidance counselor, who was also one of my football coaches. And she says, Mr. Davis, I'm just struggling in this class, and I just don't know what to do. I'm used to getting A's, and all I can really pull is C's. And he says, well, is there anybody that you can study with? And she said, oh yeah, Mike Fraunfelder's in my class. And Mr. Davis says, well, if he can do it, you surely can. And my initial response was mad, you know. I mean, how dare he say that? But the thing is, I earned that reputation because I slacked off. I did the bare minimum. I was a mediocre student. So I earned that reputation. My question to you is, have you earned the reputation of a mediocre Christian. I'm sure